Hope y'all are having a great weekend. Welcome to another episode of Murders, Mysteries, and More. My name is Kaylee.
And my name is Desi.
Be sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell next to the subscribe button to turn on post notifications. Before we get into this case, we always encourage those who have useful information to any unsolved case, please report it to your local police and sheriff department.
Every parent's worst nightmare is watching them go missing. What's even worse is finding their body, but having no answers as to why. In 2021, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons Database, which is funded by the U.S. Department of Justice, saw over 500,000 people go missing, which is equivalent to 6.5% going missing out of 100,000 every year. Luckily, many are solved. However, 20,000 people will still remain missing.
With that being said, today we will be discussing a quite odd case. This is the unsolved murder of Joshua Maddox. Josh was born March 9, 1990 in Colorado Springs, Colorado. His parents are Michael Albert Cavarda Maddox. Josh had two older sisters named Katherine and Ruth and an older brother named Zachary. Josh's family homeschooled him for 2 years before he had started high school. His high school was named Woodland, the home of the Panthers.
Many of his friends, family members, and classmates all described Josh as this bright, youthful kid. Josh was friendly towards anyone. Josh also had musical talent. He loved to play guitar. Classmates said that Josh was the class clown, and he would do goofy things such as sneaking in the school choir background, just wearing a robe in the middle of performance. Overall, he was a great guy to be around.
His older sister Ruth says that everyone loved him. He would bring a briefcase to school instead of a backpack. Josh also created his own little comics. The characters were Stickman and Smiley. His family describes him as a free spirit. He had many dreams, such as going on adventures alone. He enjoyed the outdoors.
Josh and his brother Zach were tight like most are. Josh also looked up to his big brother. In 2006, at only 18 years old, Zach, his brother, committed suicide. It is not easy for anyone to lose a loved member, especially your own brother. This took a major toll on Josh. When Zach took his life, Josh was 16 years old. Both Josh's parents and his teachers were concerned for his well-being.
This is when Josh became quote-unquote a free spirit. At the same time, Josh became a lot more introverted. 2 years later, May 8, 2008, Josh left his home and disappeared. The day after Josh did not come home, Mike, his father, called his friends to see maybe if they had seen him. But none of them knew where Josh was. May 13th, 5 days later, Mike finally decided to call the police to report his son as missing.
Although that does seem like an awfully long time to report your own son as missing, Mike did have a reason. First of all, it was common for Josh to go on so-called nature walks and be gone for a while. On top of it, Josh mentioned multiple times how he really wanted to go on an adventure. However, it did catch them a little off guard that he may be going on that adventure. His sister, Katherine, does mention Josh said he was going to go on a walk.
Josh was also 18 at this time, so it's pretty reasonable to believe he left on his own terms. Also, they thought he might have left because he was missing his brother. He needed some peace and quiet. His father says, quote unquote, "It's tough being a parent. You try to raise your kids, and when they've gotten to the age of 18, you believe they're pretty much grown up. But they are not. They still need your help," end quote.
Police couldn't do much of anything because of his age. The police did file him as a missing person, but could not do much to help with the situation. Josh was 6'2" with long strawberry blonde hair and brown eyes. Josh's family searched for him for year after year after year. Even though Mike and Roberta split, his father stayed in the same house because if Josh did happen to return, this is the place he would know.
They had no luck finding his body. That was until August 2015 when the remains of a boy were found in an abandoned cabin chimney 2 blocks away from his dad's house. The remains were later on identified to have belonged to Josh. They were identified because of his right top of his index finger had been severed during a bike accident he had as a kid, and also by dental records.
Josh's body was found in a fetal position. The cabin had been abandoned since 2005. The owner was Chuck Murphy, which he stated his family bought this cabin 60 years ago. The place was known for illegal gambling and crazy parties. Chuck does state his brother lived in the cabin when it was a rental.
This chimney was blocked off by an old bar. Josh's body was found because Chuck was going to demolish the cabin and redevelop the area. Josh's coroner did not know what to rule his death as since there was an extreme lack of evidence, so it got labeled as an accident. The coroner, Al Byrne, does mention he did not die right away.
Warren believes the most probable cause of his death were either from hypothermia or dehydration. One theory that Bourne believes is that he may have tried to break into the cabin by climbing inside the chimney. Then he got stuck because of a piece of furniture blocking the chimney. He tried to climb out but did not succeed, so Josh then died.
Chuck mentions the chimney has rebar. Rebar is a steel bar used in a tension device for reinforced concrete. Chuck also mentions how he never had any issues with animals such as raccoons climbing into the chimney because of the mesh. This would have made it extremely difficult for Josh to have climbed inside the chimney.
The coroner also states the rebar is why Josh got stuck in the first place. The only reason why his body was even found in the first place was because Chuck was having the place demolished. What is also odd is that the owner does not remember putting in this rebar. Josh's body was found only wearing a ripped thermal t-shirt. The rest of his clothes somehow ended up in the cabin.
Although there is a chance that what I'm about to say, isn't entirely accurate, there was an interesting comment to a Reddit post by FlipLock89, quote unquote, "People who have known murders, serial killers, etc., how did you react when you found out? How did it affect your life afterwards?" End quote. There was a reply from a person that said he was good friends with Josh. He went to school with a dude named Andy. Andy and Josh hung out and they told people they were planning an adventure to New Mexico.
Andy did go to New Mexico, and Andy did drugs with another dude who is a caretaker for the disabled. Andy was invited to his apartment. The guy goes to take a shower, and Andy is left alone with a disabled man. When he comes back, Andy's gone and the disabled man has been stabbed to death. Because of this, many people theorize that Andy could be Josh's killer.
Andrew Andy R. Newman was arrested for stabbing the poor man. When Andy was talking to the police, he confessed to killing a woman, then stuffing her body into a barrel. Police did find this woman. He was not charged. The main reason why they ended up not charging him is that they had another suspect, one that fit the description better than Andy, so that's why they dropped the charges.
It doesn't really mention to what extent or if he did any jail time for the stabbing of the disabled man. Fast forward a few years later, the caretaker of the disabled man was killed in a bar fight. Many believe Andy did kill the caretaker, but he couldn't be charged because of insufficient evidence. When Josh's friends figured that Andy had been hanging out with Josh, they called the police.
It could be possible that Andy was involved considering how horrible of a person he was. The police chose not to investigate any further. Apparently, many people say that they heard Andy say that he put Josh in a hole, quote unquote. This was not enough for the police to question Andy.
Sadly, to this day, we do not know if this truly was an accident. We also do not know what happened to the caretaker and if Andy has done time for stabbing the elderly man. We also do not know if there would be multiple people involved in Josh's death. We hope one day that Josh's family will figure out the honest truth. Here are some questions. Was this an accident, or a result of Josh suffocating himself because of the death of his brother? Josh lost his brother to suicide 2 years before he went missing. Was this an accident? It's very likely. There was no clean-cut, dry evidence or cause of death for what happened to Josh. Although it was ruled an accident by the coroner, that doesn't mean it was an accident, especially because he only ruled it an accident because he didn't have enough evidence. Could have been an accident. Josh could have suffocated himself as a part of a suicide due to the death of his brother and him being depressed and wanting to see, quote unquote, see his brother again. Or this could be the work of a murder.
Yeah, that's true. I do want to mention, anytime anybody loses any sort of, family member, That was Josh's own brother. So obviously, like, he had been depressed for quite some time. It is possible that he could have done this to himself. He was very tight with his brother. His family, talked about how his personality did seem to change whenever he lost his brother. There's not enough evidence. We can't declare whether that was Josh intentionally harming himself or that being an accident, or this could have, like you said, been a work of a murder. If this truly was an accident, how could Josh have fit himself into the chimney? Why did he climb in the chimney? First of all, there was rebar in the chimney. This mesh makes it extremely difficult for anything to climb in. Like Chuck said, the owner, for many years, he never had any issues with raccoons getting in or anything because of this mesh. Also, I do want to mention that there was like furniture blocking the chimney, so Josh couldn't have gotten out. His body was found with only him wearing a shirt and the rest of his clothes were gone. So that is a little bit suspicious, because how else would his clothes have gotten there? That is a little bit sus, because it would not be easy for Josh to have put that mesh back on there.
Not from the inside of the chimney.
Yeah. The thing is, like, if he knew it was cold, why would he have only been wearing a shirt? He didn't even have, like, underwear or anything.
But he was almost full frontal nudity.
Yeah, pretty much.
Ween is hanging out.
Free balling.
Yeah, he was free balling. Why did the police do so little to help find Josh? The reason why the police did so little to help find Josh is the fact that they didn't have enough evidence, didn't know where he went or anything like that, and also the fact that he was of age, he was 18. Really, they couldn't do too much of a missing persons report, especially on somebody who, quote unquote, they thought didn't want to be found in the first place anyways. I mean, they did, try to look, but not very well, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah, they could have probably definitely done more. But again, like you said, when you're 18 plus years of age, there's only so much that the police can do. They didn't really know too much about Josh's relationships with his parents. Like, for the most part, it seems like he had a good relationship with his parents. But, like, at that age, like, you don't know everything, and you can leave on your own terms. As soon as you're 18, you could go and book a trip to Hawaii, a one-way ticket, and just move there. Police went really bad now, because it's like, you're 18, you are now at an adult age, and you can make your own decisions. Not to say that it isn't as important to find people who are above 18, but it's not as much of a priority because they are able to make their own decisions. And sometimes when people do end up going away, like past that age, sometimes it's not even because, it's sometimes just because they want to.
Yeah, and without, like, evidence that he was kidnapped or anything, that's also another thing as well.
Right, and also he did, according to his sister, she mentions that he did say before he went missing that he was gonna go on, like, one of these nature walks / adventures. Probably by the police hearing that, they thought, okay, he chose to leave on his own terms, he will probably be back. What is really odd, so the cabin owner, Chuck Murphy, says he notices a strange smell. However, he brushed it off. He thought maybe it's some nasty rats. However, he found Josh's body when he was planning to demolish the cabin, because whenever he was going to demolish it, he was going to take this chimney part and take that apart and take it to the junkyard. Why did Chuck brush off the smell for so long? I do find it a little bit weird that, like, if you smell something that's, like, off like that, that you're not questioning to check everything in the house, including the chimney. If I smelled something like that, I definitely would go to investigate and try to figure out what it is. But again, this cabin is a pretty old cabin. Like, his parents purchased it 60 years ago. And also at this time, Chuck had basically abandoned the cabin for 10 years. And when you abandon a building for so long, nature does kind of start to take over it. And when you're not taking care of it, bugs and animals, all that kind of stuff can get into it. He probably truly did think that it was a dead animal in there. But it is kind of sad that, like, he brushed this smell off for so long. But at the same time, he had abandoned this cabin for such a long time.
If it was me, I wouldn't let that dead ass smell in my cabin.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't. There's people out there that they'll have property, but they don't really
care for it.
Yeah, they pretty much just kind of leave it. He probably, you know, at that point when he may have, like, noticed it, because we don't know, like, how long since Josh was in that chimney to when he went to check on the cabin. So it could have been many years. Yeah. At that point, he was looking into demolishing the cabin anyways, and was like, oh, maybe I'll get to it in a few months when I go and demolish it. Yeah, I would not want no nasty rat smell in there, though.
That's disgusting, dude. But it's getting demolished anyways.
Yep.
When Josh's body was found, he only had a shirt on. The rest of his clothes were inside the cabin. Why did Josh only have a ripped thermal shirt on, and how the fuck did the rest of his clothes end up in the damn cabin? Well, what a great question. I have a couple of theories on this. A reason why Josh was only found with a thermal shirt on and the rest of his clothes in the cabin could have been due to the fact that when you have hypothermia, yes, it's cold, but most of the time with hypothermia, you actually believe your body's getting hot. So you tend to actually take off clothes, whereas that's actually not the case. You're actually freezing to death. He could have easily ripped the rest of his clothes off, somehow managed to throw his clothes inside the cabin, and just ended up dying from hypothermia with only his shirt on. Another reason could have been that if he was murdered, somebody could have taken his clothes off for whatever weird-ass reason, put him inside the cabin, and left his thermal shirt on to make it seem like it could have been hypothermia that killed him, when in reality he was murdered. Another reason, it could have been due to dehydration as well, because dehydration does a lot of weird things with your body, just like hypothermia does. Kind of very similar symptoms, very different in certain ways though, but or it could have just been weird coincidental thing that his clothes ended up inside the cabin. Maybe he ended up going into the cabin somehow and then tried to get his way back up, and he ended up getting stuck in the chimney.
Yeah, there is a possibility that he could have actually broken in for the front door of the cabin. Then maybe he saw that someone was coming, maybe like Chuck was coming with, and he was like, oh no, like I don't want to get caught, so I gotta find a quick place to get out. So he went through the chimney but didn't realize that there was, the rebar. And that could be why it was still intact whenever he was found.
He was worried that Chuck would check the chimney.
Yeah. And so he was like, I'm gonna get out here, I'm gonna climb through this. And then he got stuck on the way.
Butt ass naked on the bottom.
And he could have maybe like gotten overheated or something. And he could have just like thrown his clothes off.
Could you just imagine somebody climbing up the chimney like almost fully butt-ass naked?
That seems a little bit crazy though.
A little bit?
Yeah, or like you said, it could definitely be someone else, because that does seem a little bit crazy that he would do that. Which leads us into our next question. The coroner believes that his death was a result of hypothermia or dehydration. How probable are these causes? So these causes are somewhat probable because, like you mentioned, with the hypothermia, how like your body thinks that it's hot when really you're cold, and that's why some of his clothes ended up off, and because he took these clothes off he lost a lot of heat, which thus caused him to die from hypothermia. He could have also died from dehydration very easily, because like being stuck in such a small space like a chimney, like you're gonna feel like you're suffocating to death. They said his death was likely not a sudden death, that like it took some time. So if he was stuck in that chimney for a couple days, obviously going more than like a couple days without water is really, really bad, and you can get very, very dehydrated fast, which is not good. Yeah. Food, you can go way longer without food. I think somewhere I read some people can go up to 40 days. I would not want to do that, but you can't. But with water, it's like you cannot go more than like 2 or 3 days without water. And even then, like even if you do go that long, you can also still very easily get dehydrated way before then.
It's because your body is made up of about like 70% water.
Yeah. Even if this was like a murder and someone put him in the chimney, even though like it was a murder, at the same time he could have also, this would have also resulted in him potentially getting hypothermia and dehydration.
Yeah, also another known fact of hypothermia, as I'm looking this up, there seems to be a common thing that happens which is called terminal burrowing, which means that hypothermia victims are usually found in a position which indicated a final mechanism of protection, like under a bed, in a wardrobe, etc. And then paradoxal undressing is actually common with hypothermia, like severe cases.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Well, and he was found in like a fetal position, so that would make a lot of sense.
More sense.
Yeah.
Andy was a shady, shady man. He did many horrible things, such as stabbing a disabled man. Could Andy have been involved in Josh's death? Why did he choose to kill Josh in the first place? Andy could have been involved in Josh's death. It's a known fact that he stabbed the disabled man. He also supposedly killed a woman and stuffed her in a barrel, even though police found a more likely suspect. He admitted to this for whatever strange-ass reason. So, it's very possible he was possibly involved in Josh's death, and a reason he may have chose to kill Josh in the first place was that maybe he pushed his buttons. Maybe he said something he didn't like, or Josh was kind of over the Andy experience and was going to leave him behind, never to talk to him again, and Andy just wasn't having it, man. Or he could have done something else. Maybe Josh had some dirt on Andy and he didn't want it to get out.
Well, and also it's mentioned that Andy and Josh were potentially supposed to go on an adventure to New Mexico together. So Josh may have decided last minute that he didn't feel comfortable going with Andy to New Mexico or something. And Andy was like, nope, since you don't want to go with me to New Mexico, I'm going to kill you, or something crazy along that. Also, like Andy, whenever he did stab the disabled man to death, he had been doing drugs with the caretaker. So Andy could have been on drugs during this time. And when you're on drugs, you can do some crazy ass shit. A lot of serial killers do drugs. They do alcohol because they overall are just very, very toxic people. They have some kind of psychological pain and they turn to these sort of things, and drugs and alcohol are going to alter your state of mind, so you're not going to make rational choices. Andy also supposedly killed the caretaker of the disabled man he previously stabbed to death. He supposedly killed the caretaker in a bar fight. He also confessed to killing a woman and stuffing her in a barrel. Did Andy also kill these people? Why were the charges dropped from the murder of the woman? So it is very possible that he did end up killing the caretaker of the disabled man that he stabbed to death. One reason he might have ended up killing that dude is because It doesn't specify how if Andy did any jail time or how much if he did jail time, but because obviously the caretaker did have to tell the police what happened to this man, the disabled man, and basically about him dying, and so basically he had to snitch on Andy. Andy could have came back later, maybe he was out of jail or something. He could have gotten onto the caretaker and gotten into a fight in the bar, threw too hard of a punch or something, killed him as well. It is also possible that he did kill that one woman and did stuff her in a barrel. Because the fact that he was able to go and say, like, the description of the woman and what he did to her, and the police actually did find this woman that was killed and stuffed in a barrel, makes me think that even if he wasn't, like, the main killer, he had to be involved somehow, because how are you going to have that information without being involved somehow? And the charges were dropped, unfortunately, because there was another suspect that seemed to fit the quote-unquote description of her killer. There wasn't, like, any, like, DNA evidence or anything the police could go off of. Unfortunately, that's why it was dropped, but I do think that definitely should have been looked more into, because how else did he know that that happened to the woman?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. How did he know? And why hasn't he been in jail for a long time for this shit?
Right, like, it just seems like
He's getting away with all this
hasn't really served much time for the amount of crazy ass shit we've seen this Andy dude do.
How did Josh end up in the chimney in the first place? What do we truly believe happened? We unfortunately do not know how Josh ended up in the chimney in the first place, whether it was purely accidental, he stumbled upon it, got scared into the chimney, or was looking for a way to break into the cabin so he could be warm. We do not know, because there was not enough sufficient evidence. They unfortunately did not discover Josh's body until many, many years later, which I'm sure, at that point he was probably just bones. But I believe anything is so possible in this case because there's so many open-ended questions. But I believe either Josh was murdered or he died of hypothermia due to him getting stuck in the chimney, or due to the fact that he got scared into the chimney and got stuck.
Right, for me, I personally believe a little bit more along the lines of murder, but I can see the other options. And the main reason is just, like, with the circumstances surrounding Andy, and also how difficult it would have been for Josh to get in the chimney in the first place, how his clothes ended up in the cabin and not on his body. And just, like, in general, it just seems very, like, suspicious.
Sussy.
Yeah. And the fact, too, that, like, it took such a long time for his body to be found. He didn't ever have a suicide note or anything. Not to say that people still don't commit suicide without having a note, but usually there's a note. Yeah, I definitely feel like that Andy dude is sus.
Oh yeah, he's hella.
Yeah, definitely do not trust him. And and even though, like, I know, like, everything on the internet isn't entirely true, it's still crazy that many witnesses do state that Andy said to them he put Josh in a hole, quote unquote. Why else would Andy have said that? It's sad because, like, not only did the parents lose
A child.
yeah, they lost their son Zach, and then 2 years later they lost their son Josh, but then they didn't know that he was dead until about 7 years later after he went missing.
Yeah, they always had the questions of what happened, what if this, what if that, and then it finally became answered, but also not at the same time because they still don't know.
Yep, and they may never know.
No, probably not. That's usually how these go.
Yep.
So sad.
It is.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to another episode of Murders, Mysteries, and More. Remember to always keep your eyes open because you never know when someone's creeping.